Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akina, a gang of young thieves swarm in Auckland Mall, scooping up electronic goods after ram raiding it with stolen cars. It is the third time the shopping centre's been hit in a year. We talked to Retail New Zealand in a family centre working with kids referred by police. Well, 2 new electric ferries for Auckland mean more competition and cheaper trips for passengers. The basic NCEA maths questions that have a bunch of young people and older ones at 6s and 7s, and the woeful stat that saw a record defeat for the Warriors League team, and the animal charity that's barking mad after the building materials for their new dog shelter go west. Don't forget you can catch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie. I'm Evie Ashton. Managers of an East Auckland town centre are beefing up security after a ram raid involving 3 stolen cars. CCTV footage from Ormiston town centre shows a group of young people following the cars, which were used to break into 3 stores so that electronic goods and clothes could be taken. Salon owner Yogesh Thapar says he didn't know what to expect when he arrived to open his store for the day.
The front door was just completely broken, and noiling third time and posty first time it has happened. So we are worried now about this mall, what is going on here.
Yogesh Thapar says it's the 3rd ram raid at the shopping centre in a year. The Revenue Minister is proposing legislation aimed at creating a fairer tax system. Inland Revenue is currently collating previously unprocessed data on how much tax the country's wealthiest people pay. David Parker says the Tax Principles Bill will require regular reporting on the tax system, which needs to be more transparent.
It beggars belief that we currently do not know what rate of tax is paid by the top cohort in New Zealand. We do know the rate paid by wage and salary earners and by small business owners.
David Parker says he'd like the legislation passed before the end of the current parliamentary term. The brother-in-law of a man killed in a port accident in 2020 says all operations should stop until ports can ensure workers won't be harmed. A worker was killed yesterday while coal was being loaded onto a ship at Lyttelton, the second death at a New Zealand port in 6 days. Gareth Fraser says his brother-in-law's loss 2 years ago was devastating and he doesn't want anyone else to have to go through it. He says any death is one too many.
I think there's a lot more that's needed. I think first and foremost they need to stop all operations at the ports of Auckland until they can actually promise that no more workers are going to be killed.
Unions in the sector have asked the government to launch an inquiry into the safety of port workers. Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Michael Wood says he received the request last week and will announce in coming days whether an inquiry will be held.
The important thing here is that we don't just have an inquiry for an inquiry's sake, that if we go down that track, that it's adding something to our understanding and actually pointing us in the right direction. So that's just what I want to get confirmation of before I go down that track.
Yesterday's Lyttelton death is being investigated by the police, the port and the Maritime Union. Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, is vowing to overhaul the platform. The BBC's Zoe Kleinman reports.
The richest man in the world will now take over ownership of the social network towards the end of this year, and he's already tweeted, of course, some ideas about the changes he'd like to make to the 16-year-old platform. Top of his agenda is freedom of speech. He says he'd like to see less moderation, which has delighted Republicans who feel they've fallen foul of left-leaning content policies, something Twitter has always denied. However, with the march of regulation and huge fines for non-compliance from many countries around the world, he may find he can't be quite as free as he might like.
And plans for upgrading Wellington's City Library have been unveiled, showing a dramatic new look that's both seismically stronger and more attractive. The structurally strengthened building will have base isolators and will be raised 60 centimetres to prevent flood damage. More light, more space and more doorways are also planned. Mayor Andy Foster says it's a complicated project that's progressing really well.
What's really exciting is that we can now showcase where we've got to and what the building is going to look like, how it's going to work, the principles that are there, the aspirations that we have for the building and for the services that it provides.
Closed since 2019, the library is currently scheduled to reopen in 2026. To sport, and rugby league coaching great Sir Graham Lowe has labelled the Warriors' record NRL loss to the Melbourne Storm as one of the game's darkest days. The 70-10 defeat was the biggest losing margin in the club's 27-year history. Lowe, who's coached the Kiwis, Manly and Wigan, says the problems go beyond the players on the field.
I've seen some big disastrous results in my lifetime, but I just can't imagine how one side can be beaten like that by another team when you're playing at this level, unless there's an absolute massive attitude problem.
The All Blacks will kick off their international season against Ireland at Eden Park on July the 2nd. They'll then play the Six Nations runners-up in tests in Dunedin and Wellington. The All Blacks lost their clash against the Irish in Dublin in November, going down 29-20. They'll also host Argentina in back-to-back rugby championship matches in Christchurch and Hamilton before wrapping up their home schedule at Eden Park against Australia in late September. A schedule for the Black Ferns has also been confirmed ahead of their World Cup defence in New Zealand in October. They'll play Australia, Canada and the United States in June, and a separate two-match series against Australia in August. And UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou hopes to fight Tyson Fury in a crossover bout next year. Fury, the WBC heavyweight champion, suggested he'd fight Ngannou when the pair spoke in the ring following Fury's sixth-round knockout of Dillian Whyte yesterday. That's the news.
Plans for greater Māori representation in Rotorua hits a hurdle.
It's got significant issues that I think would make it difficult to support.
Elon Musk buys Twitter.
He wants to do things differently and he wants the control that taking the company private will deliver.
And tougher school tests for literacy and numeracy.
I think that could trip people up. I feel like numbers with time can get a little bit muddled up in people's mind.
All I's dotted and all the T's crossed. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, but a few light showers in the west. Showers are clearing tomorrow morning, but a few are returning to Eastern Bay of Plenty, Coromandel and Northland later tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine today, occasional showers tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, mainly fine, a few showers about the eastern ranges tomorrow. For inland Marlborough, Nelson, Bulla and Westland, also for central Otago. Mainly fine, cloudy periods for Bulla and Westland today, isolated afternoon showers about the ranges tomorrow. Cloud is increasing for coastal Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago. Light showers about the coast tomorrow morning and patchy drizzle about the foothills from tomorrow afternoon. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland. Showers in the south, spreading elsewhere this evening and then easing tomorrow. And showers are forecast this evening for Chatham Islands and then clearing tomorrow morning. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ram raiders have struck again in Auckland, this time targeting shopping malls for high-value goods. In the dead of the night, 3 stolen cars drove into an Auckland mall. A group of young people followed the cars into Ormiston Mall, where they hit Noel Leeming and other shops, coming away with electrical goods and clothes. It's the latest in a spate of ram raids in Auckland, and one community leader says poverty is the root cause. Reporter Amy Williams and camera operator Marika Habazi have the story.
Broken glass and damaged storefronts litter the path the 3 cars took through the small Ormiston town centre in the early hours of this morning. Police say the thieves targeted 3 stores in the East Auckland centre, stealing electronic goods and clothes. At Noel Leeming, expensive items have been scattered onto the floor, just one of the shops hit in the late night burglary. Yogesh Thapar works at a salon opposite and says he didn't know what to expect when he arrived to open his store for the day.
The front door was just completely broken and Noel Leeming third time and Posty first time it has happened. So we are worried now about this mall, what is going on here.
Ormiston Town Centre is newly built, having opened just over a year ago. He says it's the 3rd ram raid at the shopping centre in a year and feels like it's a matter of time until his place is hit.
If the car comes inside, they can smash anything. So it can affect anybody. So just increase the security here, just the barriers both sides, and security guy must be here all the time in the mall. That can help us in future only.
The police say cleaners and security staff were at the town centre when the ram raid happened, although no one was injured. The property is owned by Todd Properties. They say they're concerned about the increase in ram raids across Auckland and will be increasing security at the town centre. Others working at the centre are concerned about the spate of ram raids. Akash Nand works at the warehouse opposite Noeliming.
Pretty worried. It's been like, since I've started, there's 2 that's happened in the past 2 months. And this time they had twice as many people come in, so who knows what will happen next.
Police say there were multiple offenders, all of whom got away in 2 of the stolen vehicles. Local resident Sarika Mubarak is a regular customer at the shopping centre and says the police need to do more to prevent ram raids.
It's really shocking. This is the second time it has happened, and our community is so good. And this is happening again and again.
Louis Duan is also a regular customer and is concerned it's happened in his neighbourhood.
Make people is not feel safe, actually, because that has happened just nearby, just in our community.
The police say the majority, 88% of ram raiders, are under 20 and most are under 17. Manukau Ward councillor Efiso Collins says the prevalence of young people involved in such crime has been a topic at regular meetings between police and community groups.
We know that there's a high number of young people who aren't in training, school or work at the moment, and those are the young people we've got to focus on. I think when they're working with youth workers, they've got community navigators that they're standing alongside. Instead, these ram raids show us that there's real poverty in the community.
Store owners like Yogesh Thapar just want to feel safe at work.
I will say please don't do that. It is affecting a lot on the business because we are already going through on the Omicron and other things.
He says the shopping centre retailers have made it through lockdowns and cannot sustain more ram raids.
If you were listening to that on radio, we'll put the video up on our web page. Now, joining us now is Greg Harford from Retail New Zealand. Kia ora, Greg. What do you think is going on here?
Look, I'm not entirely sure what the root cause of it is, but it's definitely growing in significance. I think a couple of years ago it was an unusual time when we heard about a ram raid into a retail store, but it seems to be becoming increasingly commonplace, and they now seem to be happening on almost a weekly basis, and it's really distressing for the staff, the owners, and customers of the businesses concerned.
So what can they do, businesses?
Well, I mean, businesses are looking, I know, at how they can harden up their defences. Can they put bollards outside to stop cars ramming into them and so forth? But one of the problems with that, of course, is it does just make some targets harder and then means that the bad guys might be moving their attention to other stores, which is possibly what we've seen in some of the recent incidents. What we really need to see is some social change where people come to accept and understand that it's just not the way we want to live in a world where people can drive cars into retail stores, often causing tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage for very little gain.
As I understand it, there were workers in this building at the time. You must be concerned it's a matter of time before someone gets seriously injured.
Oh, absolutely. Anything that involves driving a car into a building is likely to create at some point injury, either for the occupants of the car or for the people who might be inside at the time. One of the worries, I think, is that you don't necessarily know what's behind the windows that you're driving through, particularly if they're covered or they've got some doors in front of them.
So what about insurance costs then, given that there has been a spate of these attacks?
Yeah, well, insurance is a huge issue for retailers because as people are being targeted by the ram raiders, they're finding that their insurance companies are starting to turn around and say, well, either we're not going to cover you or we're going to cover you at a substantially higher price. And if the cost of your building insurance is going up potentially to tens of thousands of dollars, I've heard one business being quoted $30,000 to get insurance cover for this sort of thing, it just becomes increasingly unviable to do it.
There has been a suggestion that this may be driven by poverty. Do you buy into that?
Well, I think what we're seeing in a lot of cases is people either doing this for fun or perhaps as some sort of gang initiation ceremony. Often, as I say, we're hearing about cases where actually very little is taken. And in the case of liquor stores, in some cases, a couple of bottles of something's being taken, which isn't being caused by poverty, it's being caused by some other social issues.
The police, I think it was a week to 10 days ago now, announced this new National Retail Investigations Unit, right? So what is it and what is it going to do that's going to be any different to what the police are doing already?
Well, I think there's two things here. First, the National Retail Investigation Support Unit is there to help draw the threads of intelligence together and help the police prosecute those offenders who are regularly undertaking crime in retail settings. And that's a really good thing from the retail sector's point of view. But obviously, as we're seeing more of these one-off instances perhaps occur, we really need to see a good, solid police response. We need to see the people who are committing these crimes being arrested and prosecuted.
Greg, are you seeing a good, solid police response in terms of time to get to incidents when the alarm is raised?
Look, it can be variable. I think we often do hear frustration from members of the retail community that it takes too long for police to get there. That's been an ongoing issue and something we're continuing to work with the police on.
Given that as a collective, this would be hundreds of millions of dollars worth of crime a year, is it taken seriously enough by police?
Look, I think police do take these issues seriously, but the real challenge is that there's so much crime going on in the retail space that it's hard to prioritise everything. And ultimately, really what we need to see is a systemic change in society where people are thinking, actually, it's not okay to go into a real retail store and steal anything, let alone driving into the windows of a shop or breaking open skylights and climbing in at night. None of that's acceptable, and it's not the sort of world that we want to live in. And I don't think retailers really want to be moving to putting roller doors, strengthened roller doors on their premises at night to try and stop this sort of thing. But it could be where we're headed.
Thank you for joining us. That is Greg Harford, who's from Retail New Zealand. It is 16 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's unclear whether 2 new electric ferries for Auckland will mean cheaper trips for passengers. The government's announced $27 million of funding, or about 75% of the cost of 2 electric ferries, that will be owned by Auckland Transport. They'll be New Zealand made and on the water sometime in 2024. But the new vessels are no guarantee of competition on the water. Energy and Resources Minister Megan Woods is hinting current ferry operators, Fullers, could be considered for the contract.
Auckland Transport is going to own them, and part of the project will be working through the operations model. And obviously Fullers are part of the picture in there, so that will be worked through as part of the project with AT and Fullers. Obviously Fullers has expertise in ferry operation, but like any of these things, we need to make sure that that we're getting a good model being set up. Because a big part of this project is also the research element, not only how to build the boats and how they operate in New Zealand, but how to make them work from a business perspective as well.
Isn't this an opportunity to introduce some competition?
Absolutely, and that's why that's part of the process and part of the project in terms of working through the operation model.
Yeah, well, Minister Woods said he was hacked off at Fullers at the way they were operating and also not coming into the public transport model. So why would you want them to run this new innovative service?
Look, as I said to you, Lisa, that as to how it and who will operate it hasn't been decided as part of the project. So I'm not saying I want Fullers to run it. What I'm saying is I want us to, as part of what we're doing here, work through what is the best model for passengers, what is going to get more people out of their cars and onto public transport and using efficient public transport, because that's the whole purpose of what this funding's for.
So this is going to be cleaner. Is it going to be cheaper for passengers?
Look, in terms of, again, that's part of what the research will be about how to make these work from a business perspective. That you'd have to say that, yes, having a vessel that doesn't run on fossil fuels that are only going to get more and more expensive is going to be better for passengers over the long run. But working out those business models is a big part of what this project is about as well.
Can you rule out it being a more expensive service than the diesel-run ferries?
Look, I wouldn't expect it would be more than diesel. Diesel is an incredibly expensive fuel to fuel a ferry with. Compare that to electricity, a much cheaper way of operating. But as I said, a big part of what we're doing here is working through what the business model for the operation of the ferries looks like as well.
But these are fundamental questions, Minister. Do you not know the answers to them yet?
Absolutely, this is what is being worked through. As I said, you would make assumptions, and all the modelling would make assumptions about which is the cheaper fuel. Obviously, diesel, a very expensive fossil fuel that is only going to get more expensive as time goes by compared with electricity. But what we also have to do is work through what the business models look here and will operate here, and that is an incredibly important part of it. Our aim is to not make more expensive public transport. So my assumption would be that they will be cheaper because we want more people to be using public transport, and we know reliability and cost are important parts of getting people onto public transport.
So in terms of the reach, these two new vessels, can they make it to Waiheke Island?
So they have a range of 40 kilometres. Yes, they will be able to make it to Waiheke Island.
And charging takes how long?
The charging infrastructure is again a part of the project that's being worked through with Vector. But in terms of the infrastructure that needs to be put in, that will all be in place in time for the operation for these ferries, and it will need to be in a way that can turn around the ferries quickly. There's only two of them, can make sure that we can have good and efficient operation of them.
So in your press release where it says they can do inner and mid-harbour journeys, the furthest they would go is to Waiheke and back, is it?
Well, as I said, they have a range of 40 kilometres. That is their range, so that is the furthest they will be able to go.
And why is it taking so long to get them on the water?
Well, these need to be built, and I think one of the exciting things about this project is it's bringing together a whole lot of maritime expertise from different parts and companies of New Zealand. So not only do we have EV Maritime and the technologies that are coming in there, that we also have some of our boat building companies there, and then also we have the propulsion technology from Hamilton Jet coming into play. So this isn't simply going offshore and buying a ferry that's made elsewhere. This is using New Zealand maritime expertise to make boats that are right for our conditions. So these need to be built, which of course is really important for how it is that we develop our own maritime sector and create jobs.
So in terms of cutting emissions, will any diesel ferries be taken out of action as a consequence of these two new ferries coming online?
Well, of course, Auckland Transport have an aim to replace up to 6 ferries across their network. This is about building new networks, and that is about replacement of ferries. These are 2 of them, and this is a really good start, but like for anything in terms of our climate action, we always know there is more to do.
Minister, I just want to ask about the third round of funding for the government investment in decarbonising industry, this fund. You've announced the third round today. And included in there were companies like Tallies and DB Breweries. Why are taxpayers subsidising perfectly profitable companies like those to make a transition to cleaner business? Why can't they do it on their own?
So in terms of the leverage that the GIDI funding gets, the amount that government puts in compared to what business puts in, that this is an incredibly effective piece of government spending in terms of our decarbonisation. That what I know from talking to a number of the businesses who have received grants through this, that they simply wouldn't have been able to make the project work without some assistance from government. Yes, these are individual businesses, but in terms of cutting our emissions, that's something that we have to do as a country. That we've got emissions targets and that we need to collectively do that. So this is about government stepping up and working in partnership with business to achieve targets that New Zealand has as a nation.
I do understand that in theory, but if you look at Tallies, right, that's a $1 billion entity in terms of their worth. So why do they need $285,000 from you to improve potato preheating?
To make these projects work.
Why wouldn't they do it on their own, Minister, is what I'm saying. Well, they've got the financial resources.
The point is they haven't been. And that what our government says is that we need to work in partnership with businesses to ensure that these decarbonisation projects are happening, that businesses are putting in far more than government, but as a country we all have to achieve those emissions reductions. That what we're seeing in terms of the cost of abatement or the cost per tonne of emissions cut, that this is one of the most effective tools that the government has.
And that's Energy Minister Megan Woods there. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. What do you make of the electric ferries? They've got a 40k reach. We did a quick check to Waihiku Island. It's 30 coast, so they'll need a recharge to get back to base. Do we need more competition on the water here in Auckland? And what do you make of taxpayer subsidies for profitable companies to convert to, to decarbonise? Should we be doing that, or should the companies be paying themselves? Text me, Pātui Mai 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Pressure to investigate safety at Kiwi ports is mounting after the second death of a port worker in a week. A man was killed at Lyttelton Port yesterday while coal was loaded onto a ship. It comes after the death of Aotearoa Tuaiti at the ports of Auckland. Tessa Guest reports.
The recent port deaths have been tough for Gareth Fraser, whose brother-in-law died in 2020 after he was crushed when a container was dropped during a lifting operation at ports of Auckland.
It's brought up a lot of anger, a lot of sadness. It's sort of put my sister and the children back into that moment of when, their husband and father was taken away from us as well.
He's appalled the ports have continued to operate without immediate change and wants the government to capture the effect these deaths have had on families and communities.
I think there's a lot more that's needed. I think first and foremost they need to stop all operations at the ports of Auckland until they can actually promise that no more workers are going to be killed.
Meanwhile, a collection of unions are telling the government they've had enough. They're requesting an inquiry into the safety of New Zealand's ports. National Secretary for Council of Trade Unions Craig Harrison says worker safety hasn't been taken seriously enough for years.
There's been ongoing prosecutions of some of the companies in our industry. So we've reached that stage where everyone's just had enough of it.
Mr Harrison says the sector is disproportionately unsafe and the government needs to hear the experiences of port workers to understand the weight of the problem.
If we compare ourselves with the construction industry in New Zealand, and there's thousands working in that over here in New Zealand, and they don't feature anywhere near like the port industry does.
The National Party's transport spokesperson Simeon Brown also supports an inquiry and says the current regulations are failing.
I think there is merit in an inquiry into what has happened, but also in relation to the impact of, we've had significant increase in regulations around health and safety across New Zealand workplaces, and actually, is that actually working? Is it actually making it safer these workplaces?
But there's still no confirmation that an inquiry will go ahead. Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Michael Wood says he's taking the union's request seriously, but is waiting for advice from agencies to decide whether it's the right move.
The important thing here is that we don't just have an inquiry for an inquiry's sake, that if we go down that track, that it's adding something to our understanding and actually pointing us in the right directions. That's just what I want to get confirmation of before I go down that track.
Mr Wood agrees that the number of port fatalities in New Zealand is disproportionate and says a main cause of death is fatigue resulting from long hours and high pressure on workers.
Obviously, having a second death in the sector in short succession like this really does have to focus our minds on doing everything that we possibly can to be reducing the number of these incidents.
Lyttelton Ports already faced charges after the death of a worker in 2014, pleading guilty for failing to ensure the safety of its employee. Now, 3 separate investigations are underway with police, the port, and the Maritime Union. The identity of the man who died has not yet been revealed.
Early trials suggest some students will struggle to pass new compulsory NCEA standards in numeracy and literacy. The new standards will be brought in for NCEA Level 1 next year, while some teachers are worried their students will be left scratching their heads. Our reporter Nick Trubridge found they're not alone.
A mathematics master? I am not. Far from it, in fact. And I'm ashamed to admit some of the questions in this Level 1 numeracy test had me at 6s and 7s. Sit there for 5 minutes and I know I'd be able to tell you how much 510 grams of taro cost if a kilo is $7. But off the top of my head, no dice. So I took it to the street.
I don't know.
You'd reach for the phone?
Yeah, I'd reach for the phone.
Can I ask you, Ro, would you not?
No, I would not reach for the phone, no.
Just over $3.50. But I couldn't be more specific than that.
A little bit over $3.50, but I'd have to sit down and probably think about it a bit better.
Sorry, 1 kilo is $7, and then 510 grams of the same thing. 3.55.
$3.70. About $3.80.
For the record, the answer is $3.57. It's multiple choice for those 14 to 15-year-olds. But on the streets of Auckland, not one adult could get it off the top of their head. The question is from a 2021 Level 1 trial test, something which will become a must-pass to get achievement next year. The taro test proves too tough for some, so let's lower the level. Something's $80, 25% off, what is it?
60.
Dang.
60, about 70.
60.
Oh, 60. 20. 25% off 80.
60.
Oh. Back to front.
Now, luckily, these people aren't the subject of these new standards coming in next year, but thousands of students around the country will be. And early indications show some students will struggle. It's been a familiar theme in recent years, students struggling with basic maths and English, especially when lined up against peers internationally. So what's behind it all?
One of the kind of key issues is that children aren't necessarily taught right across all strands in mathematics. So what that means is that we can have children who have a heavy focus on number, for example, doing addition and subtraction, but they haven't been exposed to learning about time measurement, for example, which is then indicative of these kinds of results that you're talking about.
Meet Massey University Associate Professor Jodie Hunter, who teaches papers in the area of mathematics. She says there are inconsistencies between the way maths is taught here compared to overseas.
One of the things that would be an outlier is in many countries it's stipulated that children should receive, say, 5 hours of mathematics teaching, 5 hours of mathematics lessons a week. We don't have any kind of central oversight of that. So there can be quite wide variability in how much time children are being taught mathematics in different schools.
As for a solution?
For children to be doing well in mathematics in areas like that, it's not just the teaching of the lessons that we do, but you do need to have practice activities as well. And I think sometimes kids are on devices and not necessarily having the most quality practice independent learning time.
Back on the streets, the cell phone certainly now seems essential for many a rookie mathematician.
Depends on how difficult it is. But if it's a quick one, it'll be in here. If it's a more difficult one, it'll be on the phone.
I would go for my phone just because it's like quick, and I feel like we always use our phones these days anyway, so it's always reaching for your phone.
Yeah, I'll be reaching for my phone. That's what I'll be doing. Because, you know, in this day with technology, you just, whoop, there, even your watch, eh?
A crucial part of daily life, but to blame for some bad habits.
Mixed results here, taking that test along with Nick Trubridge's piece there. I don't know how you got on. Let us know, 2101 on the text. Kia ora, e te iwi e haere akina e a checkpoint. Thieves target an animal charity for the second time. Police continue to investigate the deaths of 4 teenagers in Invercargill and the aftermath of a humiliating 60-point defeat. How the Warriors failed to weather the Anzac Day storm. Homai o whakaaro. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Anea Evi mina pitipita kōrero.
A community leader in Auckland says poverty is driving some young people to crime. The police say 3 stolen cars were used to ram raid stores in an East Auckland shopping mall overnight, and the burglars made off with electronics and clothing. Manukau Ward Councillor Efeso Collins told Checkpoint the privilege of young people in such crime is related to the high number who are not in work, school or training. Revenue Minister David Parker is proposing a new bill aimed at creating a fairer, more transparent tax system. Inland Revenue is collating previously unprocessed data on how much tax the country's wealthiest people pay. Mr Parker says the Tax Principles Bill will require regular reporting on the tax system, and he'd like it passed this parliamentary term. Unions have asked the government to launch an inquiry into the safety of workers at the country's ports. The death of a worker at the port of Lyttelton yesterday comes just 6 days after a man died on the job at ports of Auckland. The latest fatality is being investigated by the police, the port and the Maritime Union. Tesla founder Elon Musk is calling for a raft of changes to Twitter after his $66 billion bid to buy it was accepted. He says it hasn't lived up to its potential as a platform for free speech, and he wants to relax its content restrictions and eradicate fake accounts. Mr. Musk's purchase is yet to get regulatory approval. Despite the pandemic, global military spending rose for the 7th straight year in 2021, totalling more than 3 trillion New Zealand dollars. Russian spending rose about 3%, while the United States also boosted its expenditure to about $1.2 trillion in total, more than double that of any other nation. And plans for upgrading Wellington's city library show a dramatic new look that will have light, more space and more doorways. The structurally strengthened building will have base isolators and will be raised 60 centimetres to prevent flood damage. Closed since 2019, the library is scheduled to reopen in 2026. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, ko taku hua e nai, ko Nona Peltier, who's here to talk business and is in the studio. Greetings, Nona. Okay, let's start with Mobil. It's aiming to increase its stake in the jet fuel business by buying out Z Energy. What are the details?
Yeah, so apparently, because Z is now undergoing new ownership, we just, in fact, late this afternoon, we got the notice that the scheme of arrangement, which is the takeover, the $2 billion takeover of Z by Ampol, has gone through by the court. So that's going to happen at this week. That company is going to stop trading. So Z Energy now has a new owner, and that has sparked a preemptive, strike by Mobil, who's got the right to acquire Z shares in the jet fuel business, as does BP, which is another owner. So how this works out, we're not sure. Mobil has applied to the Commerce Commission without having gone to Z about, buying the jet fuel business. But they have a clause in a contract agreement which says they could buy them out. And apparently that's the direction they're heading in. We don't know very much more. Zed certainly hasn't been in discussions with them yet. They'll have their handfuls with just dealing with the merger and how that's going to play out. But yeah, the jet fuel business is on the block, maybe.
Okay. And let's talk about PushPay Holdings, right? It's dealing with a number of unsolicited takeover offers. Okay, remind people what PushPay is and what do we know?
So it's a mobile app where you can, and it's very popular in the United States where most of its business is done. They have, basically it's a way of donating to your favorite church or whatever it is, using your mobile app. So instead of passing the hat or passing the basket, you just
electronic transfer.
Pretty much.
Yep.
So it's been a very successful business, and PushPay's done very well. And apparently, they have received a number of unsolicited offers for the business, and they've hired a financial advisor to actually sift through them. That's Goldman Sachs is going to be doing that. No details have been released. There's no guarantee a sale will go through, but the share price rose 26% in anticipation of such a deal going through. So
big numbers.
Money talks, right? Yeah. Apparently.
And speaking of numbers in the market, Nona, should we take a twirl?
Why not? Yes. Okay. So the top 50 index didn't have a great day, but that's in line with what we saw in Australia, which has been hit hard by potential shutdown in China's capital city there in terms of not just Shanghai, but major. And that has upset the market with mining. The New Zealand top 50 index, it fell 0.8%. That's a drop of 95 points to 11,813. The New Zealand dollar, it was steady today at 66.4 US cents, although maybe a slightly more positive tinge perhaps, 92 Australian and 52 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier there with business news. There's panic buying in Beijing, where authorities are expanding a mass COVID testing campaign after a rise in cases. The Chinese capital may face the same fate as Shanghai, where millions of people have been under lockdown for more than a month. CNN's David Culver is in Shanghai, living through restrictions that people are increasingly unhappy with. He has more on a viral video showing historic clips of politicians promising there wouldn't be a lockdown and the dire situation of people experiencing one right now.
It's the video Chinese censors do not want you to see or share, as it sparked a rare digital uprising on social media this weekend, highlighting a shared misery and helplessness felt across Shanghai. The video points to dysfunction, mismanagement, a city in chaos, struggling to cope with a surge in COVID cases. It resonates with so many of Shanghai's 25 million residents feeling trapped, turning to the most popular Chinese communication platforms, Weibo and WeChat, to vent. Amidst what is government-controlled internet, with any dissent quickly suppressed and erased, China's censors over the weekend struggled to keep up. No sooner would they block one version of the video, did another resurface, rapidly multiplying, flooding China's cyberspace. Some versions even disguised as QR codes to throw off the censors. The online rattling of social stability was a growing rejection of China's harsh COVID containment measures. Some even sharing this clip from the 2012 movie Les Mis, referencing a 19th century uprising in Paris. The censors swiftly clamped down, extinguishing the spread. But the users also taking aim at the obvious censorship itself, sharing clips of their own officials proclaiming China's citizens have a right to freely express themselves. Seemingly ironic, given even the first line of China's own national anthem. Online, the words, "Rise those who don't want to be enslaved," now used as a veiled reference to criticize their own government. For some, Shanghai feels like the world's largest prison. CNN witnessing it firsthand. The extent of my freedom is all the way to my terrace door here. We're lucky enough to at least get some fresh air outside. Our community volunteer is sending me what's on the other side of our door, a freshly taped paper seal, a reminder not to leave. And if I manage to get out, there's now a COVID guard posted day and night. Outside several apartment compounds, fences going up, neighbors sharing shocking images of new barriers on social media. Listen to them howl from their balconies as they're further caged in. Some finding workarounds, buying their groceries through the added layer. Others desperately rattling locks, hoping to escape. And then there are those who manage to tear down the walls. For folks locked into their homes, scenes like this are a terrifying reality. An apartment fire over the weekend in Shanghai's business district. State media quick to report that everyone got out safely. But it raises questions. Might these COVID barriers be more of a danger than the virus itself? And if you thought the city might be near reopening or easing lockdowns, images from the streets of Shanghai show giant containers, not bringing in much needed supplies, but rather helping to build more blockades. This as more positive cases and close contacts are rounded up and sent to government quarantine facilities. Some left to sleep in tents in the middle of deserted streets as their dormitories are disinfected.
Your feedback on electric ferries is flooding in. Paul says, shouldn't it be a public service model rather than a business model? And Dorothy's got in touch to say those electric ferries can't do the Waiheke run as Waiheke doesn't have an electricity system capable of fast charging their batteries, which is needed to do the round trip. So much for the Minister's knowledge of the situation, says Dorothy. AJ's got in touch to say, I live in East Auckland and we know we'll never have a train running to our area, not in my lifetime at least, and I'm only 32. Ferry is our only large-scale public transport option. And the next bit, all in capital letters, please don't let Fullers run them. Don't do it, says AJ. Another listener says this minister does know that the electricity that will charge these ferries is generated from imported coal from overseas at Huntly. And Murray's got in touch about, now this is the subsidy that some companies are getting to decarbonise, some very profitable companies. Murray says it's an incentive subsidy, just like the subsidy on EV vehicles. It is a trigger that spurs additional investment. Do keep your feedback coming. You can reach us via text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. As Russia continues its assault in the east of Ukraine, areas around the capital, Kiev, are rebuilding after the withdrawal of Russian troops. The devastating cost of the invasion is still being counted, yet some Ukrainians who fled west are already returning home. The ABC's Nick Dole has more.
In a hospital in Irpin, just outside Kiev, a major operation is underway. There's broken windows and plaster everywhere thanks to Russian shelling. But that noise you can hear is the sound of the new walls and windows being fitted. There are still patients buried out the back and they'll need to be exhumed. But the head of the hospital, Andrei Levskivsky, says getting his clinics up and running is a top priority. This is our city, he says. It will be rebuilt. This clinic is needed because people are coming back. We shouldn't need to wait until the end of the war. Almost everywhere you look in Irpin, there's damage, but also signs of renewal. The bridge into town was blown up by the Ukrainians to stop Russia's advance into Kyiv, but already a new river crossing's been built so people aren't cut off. And a major effort is underway to clear the streets of all the cars that were attacked. There were hundreds. Many of them had been devastated by shrapnel. Some even had signs on the windscreen warning that there were children inside, but they were still riddled with bullets. We came across a resident, Sergei Yurush, who'd returned to Irpin to find his car at the top of the pile. So, Sergei, this is your car up here. What on earth happened to it, do you think?
Mi automobile.
Yes, that's my car, he says. It was destroyed by a shell. In fact, his car was hit twice. After the first strike, he could still drive it far enough to evacuate some elderly neighbours. The second strike looked like a direct hit on the little hatchback. Sergei and his family managed to flee Irpin, but he's come back to see whether it's worth them all returning. After the victory, Irpin will get back to life as it was before, he says. But already things are improving. Some of our water, electricity and internet is being reconnected. But people aren't rushing to come back. Up the road, we come across an apartment block with a huge black chunk taken out of one of the corners. It had been hit by a tank. We go inside and find Luba, a retired primary school teacher. She's scrubbing walls in the dark using her phone as a torch. She's trying to make the place livable again. Yes, of course it's hard, she says. There's no water or electricity yet. We don't have anything. But this is my apartment, my home. I had no idea how much I loved my home until now. Like Luba, there'll be many other Ukrainians hoping to come home now that Moscow's shifted its military focus. But there's still a sense of caution. The Russians may have left these areas around the capital, but nobody can be sure they won't try to return.
Back home, health researchers are hoping an ambitious new study will overturn what they say are unfair blood donation rules for gay and bisexual men. Over the next 8 weeks, the University of Auckland-led project aims to gather data from 4,000 men who have sex with men. Jake McKee reports.
New Zealand blood service rules mean men can't donate within 3 months of having sex with another man.
Dr. Peter Saxton is the lead investigator for the Sex and Prevention of Transmission study. He says people find the policy discriminatory, unscientific and unjustified, partly because all blood donations are screened for transmissible infections. He says many gay and bisexual men are at very low or no risk of a recent HIV infection, and being rejected from donating blood can be stigmatising.
It can play into stereotypes about being reckless and dangerous, and into broader narratives of exclusion and discrimination in healthcare settings for gay men.
Researchers will use the data to estimate what proportion of sexually transmitted infections are undiagnosed. Dr. Saxton's hoping the findings will give the blood service the evidence it needs to change the donation rules.
The other aspect is HIV prevention. So, New Zealand has committed to ending HIV transmission by 2025. We're actually well on the way.
That prevention includes condoms, regular testing and preventative drugs. It also includes getting people with HIV treated early so their viral loads are kept very low and they cannot infect another person. The transmission study was supposed to start in February but was delayed and then moved online because of COVID restrictions. Peter Saxton says that's made things more challenging, particularly because of the optional blood test.
So much rests on being able to link someone's survey to their kit, because if we're actually diagnosing undiagnosed infection, it's high stakes. We need to make sure that maps up.
Kevin Honui works for Māori sexual health organisation Te Whāriki Takapo, which is a key partner in the study. He says it's important data about Māori men is collected, and without it there could be gaps in the research.
It may be undated, it may be uninformed. In fact, it may never have been collected before.
Kevin Honui says the population of Māori men who have sex with men could give a different picture within the overall research.
What we do know from other studies that have been undertaken in recent years is that Māori, in particular with regards to HIV, are likely to diagnose later.
The Blood Services Dr. Sarah Morley says the study's an important first step in understanding the influences on sexual health and HIV prevention. She doesn't think the organisation's policies are discriminatory.
And our hope for this study is that it gives us some real concrete evidence about the situation in New Zealand so that we can actually tailor our policies specifically to New Zealand's population.
The 3-month blood donation rule came into effect in late 2020. Before that, men had to wait a year after they last had sex with another man.
An animal shelter and charity has been left gutted in more ways than one after thieves cleaned them out for a second time. Hoo-Ha, helping you help animals, was building new dog shelters for winter at an Otaki site. Now, all their supplies have been pinched. The charity that struggled through COVID, freighting delays and increased costs has now been left in the lurch. Joining us now is Hoo-Ha's Carolyn Press-McKenzie. Carolyn, you must be pretty hacked off.
Oh, yeah, it is really frustrating. The site's actually our new Hayward site on the Haywards Hill in the Hutt Valley, and everyone in the community has pitched in to make this happen. So it's disappointing to us, but it's pretty much a community hit as well.
So what have they got away with?
This time round, it was a couple of generators which we used, to build with. Building supplies like ply, a whole lot of nails and screws, things like that, and then also the security camera as well.
So if they took your security camera, and these are some big items, were they pretty kind of prepared for this, do you reckon?
Yeah, so this is the second time. About 3 months ago, we had very similar items were stolen, and they'd brought up a high-ab in a four-wheel drive, and they were fleecing the place. And this is almost identical. The way they barge the gates down, they enter, and then the equipment they use, they cut through the bolts, steal the security cameras, as I said. It seems pretty organised, which is quite distressing.
So what were your plans? What were you doing with the materials? How important is it to finish the project?
So at the moment we've got 5 shelters at the moment, and they're all kind of located around the Greater Wellington area. This particular shelter is 157 acres that we've spent a lot of time fundraising to acquire, and then we were building basically a huge national hub, somewhere where animals from all over New Zealand could come, be rehabilitated prior to being rehomed. So there's going to be a vet clinic, a cattery, the dog shelter for rehabilitation, but we also look after farm animals, birds, native birds, and also horses and donkeys, and really whatever comes our way.
So what would you say to the people who have pinched this stuff or anyone who is benefiting from it?
They're just a disappointment to society in general. I mean, we're all working so hard to do good, to save lives and to protect lives, and to it's very selfish behaviour, and it's just so unnecessary and so disappointing. Having said that, the people who do this are the sort of people who we also bring into our shelter, and we teach them empathy and how to heal and how to actually look at other animals and other people as being worthwhile. These people clearly haven't got that memo yet, though.
Yeah, so how can members of the public help you now?
We're still asking for help to build, so any tradies that want to come in and help, we're definitely happy to receive donations, but we know time's hard for everyone. But for these particular items, they're the sort of things that are in short supply at the moment.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Ply and building is stretched out for everyone right now because no one can get their hand on supplies. So that's probably going to be our biggest problem. We hope to get animals into the shelter this winter so they could be warm and snuggy and loved, and now potentially that will be held back. But also we need to readdress our security, obviously. We thought we had it sorted and clearly we didn't.
Are you nervous it's going to happen again?
Yeah, I slept up there last night, and my husband's sleeping up there tonight until we get get some new security plans in place. But last time they robbed from us, they came back twice. We caught them the second time, and the police apprehended them. We don't know if it's the same people, but it does seem to be a very similar pattern.
Yeah, God, that's bloody rough, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty sucky. But honestly, New Zealanders are amazing. They get it. They understand the love and the commitment that we all put into it. So hopefully if the person who did this is listening, they'll grow a conscience, but I'm not entirely hopeful.
Best of luck, Carolyn, and thank you for joining us. That is Carolyn Press-McKenzie from Hoo-Ha. That's a charity that helps animals, and they've got an animal shelter, a new one that they're trying to build, and someone's taken off with all their building supplies and other stuff. If you can help out, get in touch. A quick heads up, if you were trying to watch Checkpoint on Sky Channel 83, they're doing some tech repairs this week, technical stuff, but you can still see us on Freeview Channel 50 and Sky 421. So just flick channel, Sky 421, or on the RNZ website. Embarrassing, disastrous, and the result of a massive attitude problem. Just some of the words being used in the post-mortem of the Warriors rugby league team's record-setting defeat to Melbourne Storm last night. The 70-10 loss is the biggest in club history, with the Warriors' defence capitulating in the annual Anzac Day match in Melbourne. Clay Wilson has the brutal reaction.
Missed tackle, and carries Reece Walsh into the in-goal area for try number 11.
As the exasperation wears off, the assessment is ugly. 10 unanswered Storm tries and 54 unanswered second-half points. The home side scoring the equivalent of a try every 3.2 minutes for the closing 32 minutes of the match. For New Zealand Rugby League legend Graham Lowe, it's a dark day to top all dark days.
I've seen some big disastrous results in my lifetime, but I just can't imagine how one side can be beaten like that by another team when you're playing at this level, unless there's an absolute massive attitude problem. The attitude of the Warriors is so far behind everyone, they've got points against them before they even kick the ball off.
In the immediate aftermath, Warriors coach Nathan Brown didn't hold back either, delivering a blunt answer to a question about players giving up.
Some people did, yeah. I've got no doubt at all. I've been in this game a long time, and it's disappointing to actually sit here and say that, but some people looked for the easiest way out they could, and that's sad.
The bad news for Warriors fans doesn't end with the scoreline, with Kiwis wing Dallin Watene-Zelezniak and utility forward Josh Curran forced from the field with serious injuries. While stressing there was no excuse for what transpired, Brown believes the losses were a catalyst for the capitulation that followed. A sentiment echoed by Storm coach Craig Bellamy.
The Warriors had a lot of things go wrong for them in the second half. Obviously with those injuries, I don't think anyone on the bench, and obviously that was a pretty serious injury to Dallin. And second half, they only had 7 sets in the second half, and they only completed 2, I think. I don't think I've ever seen that in a game of rugby league before.
Graham Lowe, though, is less sympathetic. He says last night is simply a snapshot of a much bigger issue.
There were things that went against them, and but I think when injuries happen to one or two players and that team crumbles, there's something seriously wrong, because if you've got the right mindset within the club, it doesn't matter who goes out, and I don't care who they bring in Superman there. If you don't develop the right attitude within the club, you're destined to get these sort of results.
As for bouncing back, Brown is thankful they only have to wait 5 days until their next game. Between now and then, the Warriors coach is promising there will be strong messages sent. As far as Graham Lowe is concerned, the situation goes well beyond the 13 players on the field.
Getting flogged out in the training field and things like that, that's not going to solve any issues. This is a deep-rooted, absolute deep-rooted mental issue of low expectation that's in the club, and it's been there for a long time. And until that's addressed, there'll be more of this to come.
The Warriors will be hoping that's not the case when they host the Canberra Raiders at Redcliffe on Saturday.
And getting a lot of feedback from you on ram raids and electric ferries. So let's start with ram raids, This person says, if poverty is the root cause of the ram raids they mean, why are they not stealing food? That's from Jim, who's from Papamoa. The ram raiders are more intelligent and have more imagination than shopkeepers and the police officers combined, Stuart from Otago reckons. And this one from Gary, where are the parents of the young people involved in the ram raids and criminal activity? Others are asking about environmental design might be the answer to preventing this, I suppose. Installing bollards. They say ram raids are not a police problem. There is no way this can be accurately predicted. A better solution is to install bollards. We were talking to Retail New Zealand. Some areas don't allow them to do that for access purposes. So stuck between a rock and a hard place, I think. On the electric ferries, this person says, so the government is commissioning the build of 2 electric ferries, and they don't know the business model. They also don't know the running costs. They also don't know the turnaround and recharge times. Is this a well-researched project or a political project, says that listener. Another person says, good afternoon. How lucky is Waiheke getting electric ferries? Here on Aotea Great Barrier, we have no ferry service at all. Only a 4.5 hour trip on the car ferry at $100 one way. And quite a bit of feedback, not happy or don't want Fullers to run these new ferries. You want a bit of competition. This person says they demonstrate little care or good comms with customers. The government needs to create opportunities and commercial frameworks for competition. A Wellington listener's got in touch to say, here in Wellington, we've inherited diesel buses from AT, Auckland Transport. Masks are now doing double duty when waiting at the bus stop. I'm assuming that is a reference to the fumes.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. A community leader says poverty is driving some young people to crime such as ram raids. The police say 3 stolen cars were used to ram raid 3 stores in an East Auckland shopping mall in the early hours of this morning, and multiple offenders made off with electronics and clothing. Manukau Ward Councillor Efeso Collins says the prevalence of young people involved in such crime has been a topic at regular meetings between the police and community agencies.
We know that there's a high number of young people who aren't in training, school or work at the moment, and those are the young people we've got to focus on. I think when they're working with youth workers, they've got community navigators that they're standing alongside. Instead, these ram raids show us that there's real poverty in the community.
Retail NZ Chief Executive Greg Harford says ram raid crimes are definitely growing in significance and businesses are looking at how they can harden up their defences. However, he doesn't believe the offending is a result of poverty. Mr Harford told Checkpoint that in a lot of cases it's people either doing it for fun or perhaps as some sort of gang initiation ceremony. The government is giving Auckland Transport $27 million to cover 3/4 of the cost of building 2 electric ferries for harbour service. Energy Minister Megan Woods told Checkpoint she doesn't expect trips to cost more than they do on the current diesel-powered ferries.
Our aim is to not make more expensive public transport. So my assumption would be that they will be cheaper because we want more people to be using public transport, and we know reliability and cost are important parts of getting people onto public transport.
Megan Woods has suggested the current ferry operator, Fullers, could be considered for the contract. The new ferries are expected to be on the water in 2024. Waka Kotahi says good progress has been made toward improving road safety, but there's still more work to be done. 11 people died on the roads over Anzac weekend. The aim of the Road to Zero strategy is to reduce deaths and serious injuries by 40% by 2030. Waka Kotahi's Tara McMillan says the strategy balances infrastructure improvements with vehicle safety while encouraging people to make the right choices.
Unfortunately, tragically, this isn't new to us. But what it does highlight, coming off the back of the weekend and the number of deaths that we saw, not to mention the number that will live with serious injuries for the rest of their lives, is that we still have some way to go in order to make our roads safe.
3/4 of Beijing's 22 million people began lining up for COVID tests today as authorities try to stamp out an outbreak and avert the kind of citywide lockdown that has shrouded Shanghai for a month. Videos on social media show people leaning out of Shanghai windows to beat pots and pans in anger or play Do You Hear the People Sing from the musical Les Miserables on flutes and trumpets. Beijing residents feared sudden localised lockdowns have now begun stocking up on food and supplies. The city recorded 33 new cases yesterday, up from 19 the day before, but the total caseload is tiny compared with hundreds of thousands in Shanghai. A judge in New York has found Donald Trump in contempt of court for failing to provide documents demanded as part of an investigation into his business empire. He's been ordered to pay a $15,000 fine every day until he does. The BBC's Neda Tofik has more.
This judge is siding with the State Attorney General Letitia James, who has been dogged throughout this entire investigation. In fact, during her more than 2-year-long investigation now, she's been in litigation with President Trump to get documents, to get testimony from him and his 2 other children. And so the judge says, while President Trump takes his business seriously, so does he. And he wants to see Letitia James get this information so she can complete her investigation.
Elevated volcanic unrest on Mount Ruapehu is now into its 5th week, though the alert level remains at 2, and GNS Science says the most likely outcome is still that no eruption will occur. It says that while the tremor level has varied during the past week, it remains high overall and continues to be the longest and strongest period of tremors recorded in 20 years. The crater lake temperature remains at around 37 degrees. And 2 Marlborough marae are now fully equipped to become part of the official emergency management response should disaster strike. Containers filled with equipment for use in an emergency have been placed at Waikawa marae in Picton and Hauhonga marae near Blenheim. In the past 6 years, communities across Te Tauihu, the top of the South Island, have experienced earthquakes, wildfires and several severe weather events. That's the news.
An hour-changing world this week, the update we've all been waiting for. Alison Ballance and the Kakapo recovery team tell us about the recent breeding season.
So what's it like sitting back and letting a kakapo mum hatch her own egg?
It's fantastic. It's hugely rewarding.
Follow Our Changing World on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or iHeart, or join me, Claire Kincannon, Thursdays and nights, just after the 9 o'clock news, here on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, a few light showers in the west. Showers are clearing tomorrow morning, but a few are returning to Eastern Bay of Plenty, Coromandel and Northland later tomorrow. It's fine today for Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. For tomorrow, occasional showers. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington, mainly fine, but a few showers about the eastern ranges tomorrow. For inland Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, also central Otago, mainly fine, cloudy periods for Buller and Westland today, isolated afternoon showers about the ranges tomorrow. Coastal Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, cloud is increasing, light showers about the coast tomorrow morning and patchy drizzle about the foothills from tomorrow afternoon. For Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, showers in the south, spreading elsewhere this evening and then easing tomorrow. And for Riekohu, the Chatham Islands, showers this evening and then clearing tomorrow morning. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Putting the brakes on a recent spate of ram raids is proving tough, with some of those involved as young as 11. The latest saw a gang of young thieves swoop on an Auckland electronics store after ram raiding their way into the shopping centre with stolen vehicles, with CCTV showing them driving right through the mall. In a separate incident, several young people under the age of 15 were arrested after an Anzac Day smash and grab. Manager of Glen Innes Family Centre, Chris Makawari, works with young people after they are referred by the police, and he joins us now. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe. Just to get it right, we take referrals from the schools, so not from
direct
the police.
from the schools, right.
Yeah. The police will refer to Genesis, not so much the family centre.
So in terms of the referrals you get from schools, why are these kids coming to you?
They're normally identified as having problems in school, and we've definitely gone down and targeted really young. So we're trying to get in pre-college, so intermediate, and it's about the behaviour in school. So trying to identify them really young to do a preventative program, and that's about building a relationship with a young person and having that opportunity to talk to them and actually give them some insight into actually trying to keep them out of trouble and trying to encourage them to listen to their parents and trying to encourage that actually their parents are trying to do as good as they can. And so it's an opportunity to do that. But we have been able to get some other programs up and running, a program called Easy 2. So Easy 2 is about trying to keep them and get them into work. So sometimes a lot of kids, especially, that's an older group, so in college, and some of those kids are falling out of school or they're out of school. So what we want to do is try to get them into work, to try to get them active so they're able to generate an income and they're able to make some good decisions rather than being idle at home and getting themselves in trouble.
So, Chris, some of the younger kids, if they're referred to you, what sort of program do they do? Because we're talking about, with some of these recent crimes, kids as young as 11 years old, a getaway driver, 11 years old.
Yeah. Well, hey, we might not get that referral, but we may get them at 10 before they get to that position. You know, a lot of the kids that we're being identified with are not at that level, but they could be that level if nobody engages with them within a year. So I might not see those particular children, but there's a chance that I could see them and I could prevent them from getting there.
And how do you do that? What does the program involve for those younger kids?
Like that's an 8-week program. We have 2 youth social workers that are involved in it. I used to be involved in the program, so I helped design the program. And the program was about building that relationship with them and having a consistent program. These kids are doing the program after 8 weeks. From the feedback, they want to do it longer.
Yeah, so is 8 weeks? Is 8 weeks enough? Can you take them back through again and do another 8 weeks?
Well, our contract is funded from MSD, and so it's only states for 8 weeks. But we are going back with that narrative to MSD and saying, listen, these kids want to engage. We should try to keep them. I can already see that some of these kids are vulnerable, that there's a good chance they will get into trouble. So there's an opportunity for us to prevent them from going to that next level.
And so how many kids do you see?
Like, their contract is 20 per year.
That seems like a drop in the bucket.
Oh, it is. And like, we need to have a number of different programs. We can't just all forward it onto one program. I'm not saying mine's the ideal program, but I'm saying there needs to be more funding coming in to do some more preventative stuff. But we need to do a whole lot of things. We can't just do preventative because there's stuff that's already happening. But a lot of these young kids that are getting in trouble now, I feel sorry for their parents because their parents have no tools to try to keep their kids in check. These kids are not having any consequences, so nothing happens to them. There's nothing there. There's no penalty. And I don't know what the right answer is, but I know there needs to be a consequence. So
do you mean legal?
Boundary.
Chris, do you mean legal penalty or a social penalty from their parents?
I think there needs multiple levels. So I think there needs to be a penalty. Like if a 12-year-old gets in trouble, he should be. There should be something in place that he doesn't want to do it again. Now, I don't know what that looks like in the current system. You know, there seems to be a whole lot of things about worrying about what the, child, youth and family is in trouble. Everyone seems to be in trouble. But, hey, these kids, something needs to happen to them. And, like, when I was young, I did what they called youth juvenile periodic detention. And I had to go to a place on a Friday afternoon. I wasn't 15, and I had to stay there till Sunday. And then I came out on Sunday. Now, that taught me a lot of things that I didn't want to get into trouble, but it actually taught me a whole lot of life skills inside there as well. So I'm all for that, I'm all for supporting that type of initiative.
What do you make of these ram raids, these smash and grabs, where there are young kids stealing cars and doing it? Have you got any ideas from what you see in here as to why this is happening with such frequency right now? Well, these kids they're not reading this in the paper and then going out and doing it. It's what the system is at the moment. It's the games that they're playing. That's what's happening in a game, and they're just. Do you mean video games, Chris? Yeah, video games. They're going on Facebook and they're saying that we're doing this, so they're all replicating that. It's a scary time because 11-year-olds have no idea what they're doing. They do not realise that they could actually kill somebody in these situations. They can't comprehend that because they're too young. So there's a real opportunity that everybody has an opportunity to be whispering in some young person's ear and say, hey, you need to watch out. Don't put yourself in these vulnerable positions. You're not in control of your life. If you're in a vehicle and you're not driving it and someone else is driving it, you do not know what's going to happen to you. Chris, really appreciate your insights. Thank you for joining us. That is the manager of the Glen Innes Family Centre, Chris Mako-Aere there, who works with young people, as he said, before they hopefully get into the system. Police are continuing to investigate the deaths of 4 teenagers in Invercargill after a deadly Anzac weekend on our roads. They were among the 11 who were killed in crashes. It's put the spotlight on road safety, with advocates saying there is still more work to be done. Tess Brunton has more.
What's this?
A toll.
Oh, okay, how much?
Just the little one today.
Earlier this year, Waka Kotahi launched its latest video as part of the Road to Zero strategy. It set its sights on reducing deaths and serious injuries by 40% by 2030, with hopes people will stop accepting that people will die or be seriously injured on our roads. On the weekend, 11 people were killed in crashes. Road safety charity Break helps those impacted by crashes. Its national director, Caroline Perry, says road deaths are sudden, often very violent, and devastating for families, friends, and communities.
So we understand how devastating the consequences are for families and friends and wider communities following a death on the road. So it's an absolute tragedy to have this many road deaths over one weekend.
Caroline Perry wants to see improvement to road safety education and better road infrastructure.
So that includes having some safer roads with things like median barriers and roadside barriers, which we know are proven to reduce crashes and, if a crash does happen, reduce the likelihood of someone being killed or seriously injured. We need safe speed limits on our roads. We still have a high proportion of roads around the country that don't have a speed limit that actually matches the condition of the road environment.
Last year's provisional figures show 320 people died and more than 2,000 people were injured during crashes. Tara McMillan is the portfolio manager of Road to Zero for Waka Kotahi and says Aotearoa has been grappling with road safety for years.
There's not one silver bullet for solving for the set of conditions and circumstances that resulted in this tragic outcome. So one of our biggest challenges is that we need a system-wide response in order to prevent deaths and serious injuries. So the starting point for that is fundamentally people buying into the fact that deaths and serious injuries do not need to occur.
She says the Road to Zero strategy balances infrastructure improvements, vehicle safety and speed management while encouraging people to make the right choices. But she says there is more work to do. The National Party's transport spokesperson, Simeon Brown, told Midday Report when it comes to road safety, the government needs to get its priorities straight.
Our view is that the government is focused too much around putting out its messaging around Road to Zero without actually making the investment in the areas which actually need to be done.
Police Assistant Commissioner Bruce O'Brien says the Road to Zero campaign is looking at infrastructure as part of its strategy, but he wants people to take personal responsibility when they're on the road.
People just need to stick to those basic 4 areas and we would see a massive reduction in these tragic and completely preventable events.
Road Safety Week will be held next month, with hopes it will help to make the roads safer for all.
It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some more of your feedback. Lots of views on the electric ferries. This person says the electric ferries will be a white elephant. The biggest manufacturers of diesel engines are all developing hydrogen-powered diesel replacements. Cummins makes an electrolyser which makes hydrogen fuel. This is being used in Paris to power hydrogen-fuelled taxis. That's from Mike in Tauranga. Thanks for the details, Mike. Anne's got in touch to say we've already done it in Wellington, meaning the electric ferries. What is the hold up? And another person says an electric ferry doesn't necessarily need a battery. A hydrogen fuel cell could work just as effectively. On the maths test, this is the NCEA maths test that we took out to the streets. A maths teacher's got in touch. Andrew. Hi, Andrew. Andrew says, reaching for the phone, maths teacher here. To solve those problems is not a bad, embarrassing act. The best procedure is to mentally estimate the answer and then know how to use technology. Use the technology to get the accurate answer, most reliable in a modern and complex economy, says Andrew, the maths teacher. Do keep your feedback coming. Elon Musk is poised to complete one of the biggest deals in tech history, buying Twitter for an astonishing $66 billion. He's vowing to revitalise the social media platform, which he says isn't delivering on its promise of free speech. CNN's Brian Todd has more.
The world's richest man buying up one of the world's most powerful social media companies, generating huge buzz tonight. Twitter has agreed to sell itself to Elon Musk, the flamboyant, controversial CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, a deal that could bring enormous change to the popular platform.
What we're talking about here is the confluence, really, of a number of conversations we're having nationally and internationally about, the power of billionaires, for example, the influence of tech platforms on democracies.
We're going to have an option.
With this purchase, Twitter will now be led by one of the quirkiest business titans America's ever known. Musk himself has used Twitter and his more than 80 million followers to build his brand, but also to troll others. In recent days, he posted a tweet making fun of Bill Gates' physique. He recently questioned the relevance of Twitter, writing, quote, "Is Twitter dying?" And he suggested that Twitter should consider removing the W from its name.
It's hard to know when exactly to take him seriously because he is so eccentric. And so when this idea came up, we know that this would cost him billions of dollars.
Even with his quirks, why should the average consumer care that Elon Musk will lead Twitter?
Many of its users are government officials or government accounts or politicians or business leaders. That could have really important effects on how the rest of us perceive many of these topics that have so many influential people engaging on.
One concern critics have, Musk's goal of bolstering free speech on Twitter and his complaints about Twitter censoring too much content and its permanent bans of some users.
I don't think we actually want an anything goes Twitter because we've seen that white supremacists and conspiracy theorists are willing to use the platform to spread lies and disinformation, to suppress people of color from voting, and to spread hate and harassment campaigns.
Something that Musk's push for more free speech leads to questions about the account of the former president, barred from Twitter last year after the January 6th attack.
The big question about how Twitter handles Donald Trump's account going forward is one that Musk has not touched at all, but one that he will inevitably be forced to confront.
Today, Donald Trump told Fox News that even if Twitter moves to reinstate his account under Elon Musk's leadership, Trump himself says he's not going back to Twitter. He says he's going to join his own social media platform called Truth Social within the next few days.
Emmanuel Macron is vowing to unite France after winning the presidential election and beating far-right challenger Marine Le Pen. Despite being defeated, Le Pen's 41% support suggests there is a desire in France for a radical shift in policy. CNN's Melissa Bell has more.
As Emmanuel Macron became the first French president in 20 years to win a second term, the European flag served as a reminder of what had been at stake.
Merci.
His far-right rival, Marine Le Pen, had promised to defang Europe's institutions, turning the EU into a much looser alliance of sovereign nations, a position apparently backed by 42% of voters.
For our French leaders, as for the European leaders, this result bears witness to the great mistrust of the French people towards them, which they cannot ignore, and to the widely shared aspiration for a great change.
It's a change Vladimir Putin has been backing for years, receiving the far-right candidate just ahead of the 2017 French election. And last week, the jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny weighed in, urging the French to back Macron and describing the Russian bank that lent Le Pen's party nearly $10 million in 2014 as a well-known money laundering agency created at the instigation of Putin in a tweet just hours ahead of the French candidate's debate.
You depend on Russian power. You depend on Mr. Putin.
I am a completely free woman.
Marine Le Pen insists the loan was strictly a financial arrangement that her party is reimbursing in full. But she remains cautious about further sanctions against Moscow.
To pretend that the French or other European peoples could absorb the consequences of a total cut-off of Russian gas, oil or raw materials is simply irresponsible.
But Macron's gone much further than just sanctions, sending 100 million euros of weaponry to Kyiv, something Le Pen had said she would be prudent about. She also announced that she wanted a strategic rapprochement between NATO and Russia. In the end, neither her positions on NATO and the EU nor her proximity to Moscow prevented Marine Le Pen from achieving a historic score, coming within 5.5 million votes of Emmanuel Macron. She's now looking to June's legislative elections to try and deprive him of his governing majority, which could present challenges for France's continued support to Ukraine. And Le Pen is far from alone in Europe, with allies amongst the bloc's far-right and Eurosceptic parties, many of them also historically close to Moscow. Defeated but unbowed, vowing to start a fresh fight for her own vision of the future.
Billions of dollars worth of Russian luxury goods are sitting idle at ports around the world, blocked by sanctions imposed in response to the invasion of Ukraine. Their confiscation has led to some interesting questions about who owns them and whether they can be sold. CNN's Nick Robertson has this report from Belgium.
Thousands of luxury vehicles not going to Russia. In this corner of the sprawling lot, 200 top-end Cadillac Escalades, the spoils of sanctions, literally piling up inside Belgium's megaport Zeebrugge, a new front line in Europe's economic war with Russia, pitting Belgian customs agents against Russia's sanctioned oligarchs.
We have been freezing over 200 billion euros of Russian assets. We have also other luxury goods that are being blocked. Momentarily, there are 2,500 containers being blocked for more investigations.
But who actually owns these seized valuables, and can they be sold for money to support Ukraine? It's fast becoming a pressing question, particularly in Europe, feeling the economic pinch of Russia's war. These vehicles aren't Russian-owned yet, but there is plenty of Russian wealth falling under Belgian government control.
There's already 2.7 billion Russian assets that were blocked, were frozen, and then also almost 200 billion transactions that were blocked.
And the goods that have been seized so far, what happens to them? Who owns them?
The transactions, of course, are blocked, and the assets itself are frozen, so they cannot be used anymore. It doesn't mean that they become that the government owns them.
And all these vehicles we're looking at, they all say destination Russia.
Yeah.
In Zeebrugge, shipping terminal boss Mark Adrianson is on the front lines enforcing sanctions. Any vehicle bound for Russia, valued over $55,000, is impounded.
So for the moment we have 8,000 cars started. 8,000 already, yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, although we could get more.
A lot more. He says 120,000 vehicles bound for Russia a year transit his controls. He's already turning some away.
We are not there to store cars. We are there to handle cars and to do added value on cars.
Pressure on Adriaensons and Belgium will grow. The war far from over, and trade ties with Russia deep. In the third quarter of last year, Russia was the European Union's largest maritime trading partner, according to EU data. And 1/3 of all those goods coming through ports like this in Belgium and just up the coast in the Netherlands. It could all add up to potentially billions of dollars of goods that could be used to help Ukraine. But turning it into cash requires legal confiscation. Not an easy process. European parliamentarians are being warned by EU justice officials.
To get somebody's property confiscated, we need a crime. We are looking for legal solutions, money laundering, embezzlement, perhaps sanction circumvention.
Until then, seized goods and assets will age, while Ukraine's frontline fighters die for fresh weapons.
A study has found that future foods such as lab-grown meat or pulverised insects could have a big impact on reducing carbon emissions and saving water, as well as freeing up land for nature. The research has been published in the journal Nature Food. The BBC's Helen Briggs has been looking at it, but not sampling the research.
Ever fancied snacking on ground-up flies and crickets or edible algae? What about a nice cut of meat, not from a cow or a pig, but grown in a laboratory? These foods may sound futuristic, but some are about to reach our plates in a drive to supply essential nutrients while being gentler on the planet. According to a new study, novel foods could save water, free up land for forests and wildlife, and cut greenhouse gas emissions substantially compared with our current diet. Rachel Mazak of the University of Helsinki is the lead researcher.
The main findings of our study show that with significant reductions in animal source foods and substitutions with novel or future foods and plant-based protein alternatives, you can have significant reductions in environmental impacts in terms of global warming potential, land use and water use.
But there are caveats. It's not yet clear how willing consumers will be to shift their eating habits, swapping a juicy steak for meat grown in bioreactors or protein powders made from algae, fungi and bacteria might not hold universal appeal.
Just a bit of feedback before we head off. Greg's got in touch to say, I recently drove our premier State Highway 1 between Rotorua and Taupo for the first time in many years. I don't think Waka Kotahi have even waved a shovel of improvements to this busy road since 1973. It's embarrassing. That's about all we've got time for. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything, check us out on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. An online auction of 24 Auckland city properties today just saw two sell. First up looks at the slowdown in the housing market. And time for a tiny bit of feedback. One last one before we go. Jenny's got in touch to say how lovely to see Nona back live and in the studio. Indeed, Nona, an absolute delight. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Auckland Transport will get $27 million in government funding towards building 2 electric ferries for harbour service. Retail New Zealand says businesses are hardening their defences against crimes like last night's ram raids in an East Auckland shopping mall. GNS Science says volcanic unrest on Mount Ruapehu continues for a 5th week, but the alert level remains at 2. And a New York judge has found Donald Trump in contempt of court for failing to provide documents as part of an investigation into his business empire. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
I'm Kadambri Raghukumar, and in Art Stories in Aotearoa, I'm meeting artists of Asian origin all across New Zealand. From theatre to design to music and contemporary art. Art Stories in Aotearoa, a new video series on rnz.co.nz.
No mai, hare mai. Hello there and welcome along to Nights on RNZ National. I'm Charlotte Ryan and filling in for Brian Crump this week as he's on a very well-deserved break. I hope you've had a great day. For many, this was the first day back after the long Anzac weekend. I've had a lovely one and so pleased to be with you this evening, keeping you company. After 7 o'clock, I'll be joined by sociolinguist Julia de Bries, who's going to be discussing with us terms of address. Terms of address like, how do you like to be greeted? What do you prefer, Mrs., Ms., Mr. or mate? Some people hate being called bro. Me too. Well, I'd love to know your thoughts and we'll talk more about that after 7. We also look at relationships and food. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. We'll find out whether that actually works if you've got different tastes to your partner. Pacific Waves is back and our new hidden sport feature kicks off after 9 o'clock. But right now it's time for Trending Now. Tonight in the detail, why do the majority of Russians back the actions of their strongman leader Vladimir Putin? As the detail finds out very soon, the answer goes back centuries. But first, an insight into the sounds from the deep. Auckland marine scientist Craig Radford is keeping his ear to the ocean and recording what he hears. Professor Radford is one of 9 international scientists capturing underwater noises to contribute to the Global Library of Underwater Biological Sounds. The sounds assist in identifying how marine life communicates with each other, and in this part of the world it will also help get us a picture of the biodiversity challenges marine life faces in New Zealand. Craig Radford spoke to Catherine Ryan this morning on 9 to Noon about how he went about capturing the sounds.
We use, GoPros actually have sound on them as well, but for the quality that we need, we use underwater microphones or hydrophones as they're more commonly known. And these devices basically work on the same mechanism as what a microphone works, and we can record the sounds and we take them back to the office and download them and listen.
Are they microphones that sort of are dropped down on a wire? Are they attached to a boat? Can you fix them? What's the setup?
They're all of the above. We have the main ones that we use automated, so they're fully enclosed, waterproof obviously because they go underwater, and we moor them typically on the seafloor, and they can be down for depending on what the duty cycle is that we have on them. If we record continuously, they're down for about a month at a time. If we have them on a duty cycle where we're only recording every so often, say 5 minutes every hour, then they can be down for about 6 months or more.
How do you know what you're listening to?
That's the key question. We don't know a lot about what we're listening to, and that is kind of the aim of glubs. The majority of the sounds we hear, we can't attribute to a species.
You must be working it out, though, because we're going to listen to a couple of sounds right now. This one is the sound of kinna.